Have you ever had one of those nights where the darkness feels alive? Where the silence whispers secrets you're not supposed to hear? This is one of those nights. And if you're here, stay with me. You won't want to face this story alone. My name is James Carter. I'm 32 years old, and until last year, I was the most skeptical person you could ever meet. Ghosts, lies, demons, movie plots, curses, pure superstition. But now, as I sit here in a room lit by nothing but a flickering candle, I can't unsee what I've seen. It all started with an email, one of those chain letters, you know? Share this or suffer the consequences. I laughed, deleted it, life went on. But 2 days later, things started to get weird. It began subtly, a shadow that seemed to linger in the corner of my living room no matter how many times I turned my head. Keys disappearing from their usual spot, only to show up in the fridge. A faint sound, like a child's laughter, coming from the walls at night. I live alone. Pause here for a second. I want to ask you something. Do you believe in curses? Have you ever received one of those creepy chain letters? Tell me in the comments. I need to know if it's just me. The real nightmare began when I started seeing her. At first, I thought it was sleep deprivation, stress, a trick of the mind. But every night, as I lay in bed, the figure would be there, at the foot of my bed, tall, thin, and draped in a tattered dark dress. Her face, I wish I could forget it. The hollow eyes, the bloodless lips that stretched into a grin too wide for any human face. She never moved, never spoke, just stared. One night, I decided to take control. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and a ridiculous amount of courage, I yelled into the darkness, "Who are you? What do you want?" For the first time, she moved, her head tilted, her neck cracking as though it hadn't moved in centuries. And then she whispered, "You invited me." I didn't know what she meant. Invited her? When? How? But I didn't have time to dwell on it because the whispers started. They were everywhere, in my ears, in my walls, in my head. Names I didn't know, places I'd never been to, events that hadn't happened yet. And then came the night. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Take a deep breath, James. It's time to tell them what really happened. I called my best friend, Liam. He's one of those guys who loves anything paranormal. Ghost hunts, conspiracy theories, creepypastas, his idea of fun. "James," he said after I poured out everything, "this sounds like a classic night haunting. It's like those stories online, creepypasta, only it's real. And if she said you invited her, it might have something to do with that email." I hung up, but his words stuck. What if it was the email? What if deleting it broke some unspoken rule? Desperate, I searched my inbox. Nothing, not even in the trash. And then my phone buzzed. It was a message, a number I didn't recognize. The text read, "It's too late now. She's here to stay." From that point on, my life wasn't mine anymore. Objects would move in plain sight. The lights would flicker, even when the power was off. And then, the people around me started disappearing. It started with Liam. I called him, panicking, needing answers. But when I got to his apartment, it was empty. His things were there. His car in the driveway. But Liam, gone. As if he never existed. The police thought I was crazy. His parents wouldn't answer my calls. His number was no longer in service. And then I remembered what the figure said that night. "You invited me." Was I the reason? Was Liam taken because of me? And now, here I am, telling you this. Because if you're watching this video, there's something you need to know. She's still with me, every night, standing at the foot of my bed. But now, she's not alone. There are others, people like Liam, like you. Do you believe me? I know you think this sounds like one of those creepy stories you find on the internet, but let me tell you, this is not just a story. It's real, and if you're still watching, you've already taken the first step into my world. After Liam vanished, I stopped sleeping. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd feel them watching me. Not just her, but others. Shadows that danced just out of sight. Whispers that grew louder the more I tried to ignore them. I needed answers. I started digging through every possible forum, every creepypasta site, every dark corner of the internet. What I found chilled me to the bone. There were others. Dozens of stories, eerily similar to mine. People who received the same email, people who saw the same figure, and every single one of them ended the same way. The person vanished, and the story was left unfinished. Except for one. Let me ask you something. If you knew the truth could destroy you, would you still seek it? Tell me in the comments. I need to know if I'm the only one who couldn't resist. I found a post from a user named Nightstalker88. He claimed to have survived. His story was buried deep in an old thread, but his instructions were clear. Find the place where it all started. Face her, alone. Whatever happens, don't let her speak first. It sounded insane, but I had no other choice. If I didn't end this, I knew it was only a matter of time before I'd end up like Liam, or worse. I traced everything back to the night I deleted the email. That night, I was at a cabin in the woods, a cheap rental I'd found online for a weekend getaway. It seemed peaceful at the time, surrounded by nothing but trees and silence. That's where I had to go. When I arrived, the cabin looked different, older. The wood was rotting, the windows cracked. It was as if it had aged decades in just a few months. Stepping inside, the air was thick, suffocating. The whispers started immediately, louder than ever. But this time, I could make out words. You shouldn't have come back. She's waiting. I followed the whispers to the basement, a place I hadn't even noticed during my first visit. The door creaked open, revealing a staircase that descended into total darkness. With nothing but a flashlight, I made my way down. At the bottom, there she was. Her form was even more horrifying than before. The grin was wider, her hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dark. And behind her, I could see them. Liam, others, their faces frozen in terror, their bodies distorted as if they were trapped between two worlds. I opened my mouth to speak, to demand answers, but she beat me to it. You can't save them, James, but you can join them. For a moment, I froze. My mind raced, remembering the instructions from Nightstalker88. Don't let her speak first. I had already failed. But then, something shifted. The shadows behind her started moving, reaching toward me. The air grew colder, the whispers deafening. I felt myself being pulled into the darkness, into her world. And then, everything went silent. I woke up in my bed. For a moment I thought it was over, just a nightmare. But then, I saw it. Carved into the wall above my bed, in jagged letters that dripped with something dark. You can't run. You can't hide. She's with you now. They say that when you're in danger, your body fights or runs. But what do you do when there's nowhere to run? When the thing you're fighting is already inside your mind? The message on the wall wasn't the only thing that changed. My house wasn't my house anymore. The layout would shift overnight. Doors that once led to my bedroom now opened to endless hallways. My reflection in the mirror didn't move in sync with me. It stared back, almost mocking. Worst of all, the figure wasn't just confined to the shadows of the night anymore. She followed me during the day. It started small. A fleeting glimpse of her face in a shop window, her shadow lingering behind me in the reflection of a puddle. But it escalated. One afternoon I was driving down the highway when I glanced at the rearview mirror. She was in the back seat. Her hollow eyes stared at me, her grin stretching wider as I slammed the brakes. The car swerved off the road, and when I turned around, she was gone. That night, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I called every number in my contacts, desperate for help. But every call went straight to voicemail. Every text was left unread. I was alone, or so I thought. Have you ever been so desperate for answers that you'd risk everything, even your sanity? That's where I was, and trust me, you don't want to be in my place. The next day, a package arrived at my doorstep. No return address, no name. Just a plain, black box. Inside was an old journal, the pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was messy, almost frantic, as if whoever wrote it was in a hurry or terrified. The journal belonged to someone named Eleanor Wright. Her first entry read, "To whoever finds this, it's too late for me. But maybe, just maybe, you can break the cycle." Eleanor's story was eerily similar to mine. The email, the figure, the disappearances. But there was something she knew that I didn't. The figure isn't just a ghost. She's a parasite. She latches onto people through fear, feeding on their terror until there's nothing left. But Eleanor had found a way to weaken her. In her final entry, Eleanor wrote about a ritual, a way to sever the connection. It was dangerous, she warned. It required confronting the figure directly, in her own realm. The instructions were vague. Write your name on a mirror. Speak her name 3 times. When she appears, follow her without hesitation. The last words in the journal sent a chill down my spine. If you hesitate, she'll trap you forever. I had no other choice. That night, armed with nothing but the journal and my dwindling courage, I prepared for the ritual. If you were in my position, would you do it? Would you risk your life for a chance at freedom? Tell me in the comments. I need to know I'm not the only one who'd take that leap. With a shaking hand, I wrote my name on the mirror. James Carter. The letters seemed to glow faintly under the dim light of my room. Then, I spoke her name. 3 times. Eleanor Wright. Eleanor Wright. Eleanor Wright. At first, nothing happened. The silence stretched on, suffocating, and for a moment I thought it hadn't worked. But then, the air grew heavy. The room darkened, and the reflection in the mirror began to change. It wasn't my room anymore. It wasn't even my reflection. It was her. She stepped out of the mirror, her hollow eyes locked onto mine. Without a word, she turned and walked into the darkness. And I followed. The moment I stepped through the mirror, I felt it. The air was colder, heavier. I was in her realm now, a place where the rules of reality didn't apply. The ground was soft, like walking on ash. The sky was a swirling void, filled with whispers that seemed to come from every direction. And then, I saw them. The souls she had taken. They were everywhere, wandering aimlessly, their faces twisted in expressions of eternal torment. Liam was among them. His eyes met mine for a brief moment, and I saw a flicker of recognition. But before I could reach him, she appeared. Her grin was wider than ever, her form towering over me. This time she spoke clearly, her voice echoing in the empty void. "You don't belong here, James. But since you've come, let me show you what awaits." She raised a hand, and the ground beneath me began to crumble. I was falling, spiraling into the abyss, her laughter ringing in my ears. And then, falling through darkness feels endless. It's not the sensation of hitting the ground that terrifies you. It's the idea that you never will. The fall was relentless. I tumbled through an abyss where time and space felt meaningless. Her laughter echoed all around me, a cruel symphony that twisted my thoughts. Then, abruptly, I landed. The impact wasn't physical, it was mental, emotional. I was back on solid ground, but the surroundings were different. This wasn't the void anymore, it was her domain. The world around me was a twisted reflection of reality. Buildings stood crooked, their windows glowing faintly with a sickly yellow light. The streets were eerily silent, except for the distant sound of whispering voices. I tried to move, but my legs felt heavy, as if they were being pulled by invisible chains. Suddenly, a voice broke through the silence. It wasn't hers. It was Liam's. "James, don't stop moving." I turned, and there he was. His face was pale, his body translucent like a fading memory. He looked terrified. "She's playing with you," he said, his voice trembling. "She wants you to give up, to stay here forever. But you can still break free." "How?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Liam hesitated, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "The journal. Did you bring it?" I nodded, clutching it tightly in my hands. "There's one more thing Eleanor didn't tell you," he said. "You have to find the heart of her domain and destroy it. But you'll only get one chance. If you fail..." Before he could finish, his form started to flicker. He reached out to me, his eyes desperate. "Don't let her win, James. Promise me." And just like that, he was gone. Imagine being told you have one shot, just one, to save not only yourself, but everyone else who's been trapped. Could you handle the pressure? I didn't have time to think. The whispers grew louder, closer. Shadows began to move, slithering along the ground toward me. I ran. The streets twisted and turned, leading me deeper into her domain. The further I went, the more distorted everything became. Buildings melted into grotesque shapes. The whispers turned into agonized screams, and the air grew colder with every step. Finally, I reached it, the center of her domain. It was a towering structure, pulsating with a dark, otherworldly energy. At its core was a glowing orb, surrounded by writhing shadows. I knew what I had to do. I opened the journal, flipping through the pages until I found it, the final step of the ritual. Confront her, speak her name, and when she's distracted, destroy the heart. I stepped forward, the journal in one hand and a shard of broken glass I'd found on the ground in the other. She appeared before me, her grin wider than ever. Her eyes burned with a malicious light as she slowly circled me. "You're brave, James," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "But bravery won't save you. This is where I need you to listen carefully. If you were me, standing face to face with the thing that's haunted you, would you have the strength to finish it? Or would you freeze?" I didn't freeze. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I shouted her name, Eleanor Wright. For the first time, her grin faltered. "What did you say?" she hissed, her voice losing its composure. "Eleanor Wright," I repeated, louder this time. She lunged at me, but I was ready. I swung the shard of glass at the glowing orb, driving it deep into its core. The effect was immediate. The entire domain began to collapse. The shadows screamed, writhing in agony, as the orb shattered into 1,000 pieces. Eleanor let out an ear-piercing shriek, her form disintegrating into the air. And then, silence. I woke up in my bed again, the journal still clutched in my hand. The wall above me was blank. No messages, no warnings. For the first time in months, I felt free. But as I looked closer at the journal, I noticed something strange. The last page had a new entry. In my handwriting, "You can't destroy her. You can only pass her on. Who will you choose?" Freedom is a strange thing. When you think you've earned it, it slips through your fingers like sand. And sometimes the price you pay for it is heavier than you ever imagined. The message in the journal sent a chill down my spine. You can't destroy her. You can only pass her on. I read it again, hoping I'd misunderstood. But the meaning was clear. Eleanor hadn't defeated her. She'd simply transferred the curse to me. The realization hit me like a freight train. She wasn't gone. She was waiting, lurking in the corners of my mind, ready to emerge again. Unless I found someone else. For days, I wrestled with the thought, how could I do this to someone else? How could I condemn another soul to the torment I'd endured? But the signs started returning, the whispers in the night, the fleeting shadows in the corner of my vision, and worst of all, the laughter. It wasn't over. One night I sat at my desk, staring at the journal. The last entry taunted me, the words practically glowing in the dim light of my room. Who will you choose? I thought about everyone I knew, friends, co-workers, strangers I passed on the street. Was there anyone who deserved this? And then, an idea began to form. A horrifying, desperate idea. What if you had a choice between saving yourself and damning someone else? Would you make the sacrifice, or would you let the darkness consume you? Tell me in the comments, because I'm still trying to decide. The next morning I packed a bag and left my apartment. I couldn't stay there anymore, not with her shadow looming over me. I wandered aimlessly for hours, ending up at a diner on the outskirts of town. It was nearly empty, save for the waitress behind the counter and an older man sitting in a booth. He looked tired, worn down by life. His clothes were shabby, and his hands trembled slightly as he sipped his coffee. He was alone. I approached him hesitantly, the journal hidden under my jacket. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, his tired eyes meeting mine. "Can I help you?" I hesitated, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. I think I have something you might want to read." I placed the journal on the table in front of him. His eyes scanned the cover, then flicked back to me. "What is this?" "It's hard to explain," I said, my voice trembling. "But it might be the answer to something you've been looking for." He frowned, but opened the journal, flipping through the pages. His expression shifted from curiosity to confusion to something I couldn't quite place. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice low. "It found me," I said, which wasn't exactly a lie. "And now it's finding you." As I walked out of the diner, I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. I'd done it. I'd passed it on. But as I got into my car, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror. She was there. Her hollow eyes stared at me, her grin wider than ever. I thought I was free. I thought I'd won. But she's not just a curse you can pass on. She's a part of you, a shadow you can never escape. The journal had lied, or maybe it hadn't. Maybe I'd misinterpreted its message. Either way, I wasn't free, and now someone else was trapped too. The thought haunted me as I drove aimlessly through the night, her laughter echoing in my ears. What if there was no escape? What if this was just the beginning? Sometimes we think we're running away from something, but what if we're running straight into its arms? What if the act of escaping seals our fate? The roads stretched endlessly ahead of me, shrouded in a thick fog. I drove aimlessly, her laughter growing louder with every passing mile. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, knuckles turning white as fear clawed at my chest. I thought giving away the journal would buy me peace. I was wrong. It started with the radio. I hadn't touched it, but static filled the car, crackling unnaturally. Then a voice emerged, faint, distorted, and chillingly familiar. "James." I slammed my hand against the radio, trying to turn it off, but the voice persisted. "Did you think you could run from me?" My breath hitched. Her voice dripped with malice, wrapping around my thoughts like a vice. "You think passing the journal absolves you? Foolish boy. I'm not bound to it. I'm bound to you." The realization hit me like a freight train. The journal wasn't her prison. It was her invitation. And by giving it away, I'd only spread her reach. The car suddenly veered off the road, the wheel yanked from my hands by an invisible force. I screamed as the vehicle skidded to a halt, narrowly missing a massive tree. The headlights illuminated a figure standing in the fog. It was the man from the diner. He stood motionless, his eyes hollow, his body trembling. The journal dangled from his hand, and his lips moved as if whispering something I couldn't hear. I stepped out of the car cautiously, the cold air biting at my skin. "Sir?" I called out, my voice shaky. He turned to face me, and my blood ran cold. His eyes were completely black. "Why did you give this to me?" he rasped, his voice layered with hers. Before I could respond, his body contorted unnaturally, bones cracking as he bent backward. A guttural scream tore from his throat, echoing through the fog. And then she emerged. Her shadow rose from his body, towering over us both. Her grin was wider than ever, her hollow eyes glowing with a sinister light. "You can't escape me, James," she said, her voice a symphony of terror. "You've only made me stronger. Imagine facing the very thing you thought you'd defeated, only to realize you've fed it. What would you do? Would you stand your ground or give in to despair?" I ran. Adrenaline surged through me as I bolted into the fog, the sound of her laughter echoing behind me. My mind raced, searching for a way out, but every path seemed to lead back to her. The ground beneath me shifted, turning into a black, viscous substance that clung to my feet. I struggled to move, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. Then, I saw it, a faint light in the distance. Desperate, I pushed forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. The light grew brighter, revealing a small cabin nestled in the fog. I burst through the door, slamming it shut behind me. The room was eerily silent, filled with shelves of old books and strange artifacts. In the center of the room stood an old woman, her eyes sharp and calculating. "You've brought her here," she said, her voice steady. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for air. You know her?" The woman nodded. "Eleanor. She's an ancient curse, a parasite that feeds on fear, and now she's latched on to you." "How do I stop her?" I pleaded. The woman hesitated, her expression grave. "Stopping her comes at a price. Are you willing to pay it? Would you pay any price to rid yourself of your worst nightmare, even if it meant sacrificing everything you hold dear?" The woman handed me a dagger, its blade inscribed with runes that glowed faintly. "This is the only way to sever her bond," she said, "but it will cost you your life or someone else's. The choice is yours." My heart sank. Was I prepared to make that sacrifice? And if not me, who? Before I could decide, the door behind me creaked open. She was here. The door swung open, and there she stood, her form more terrifying than ever. The shadowy tendrils surrounding her writhed like living entities, reaching for me. Her grin widened, revealing rows of jagged teeth that didn't belong in any human mouth. "James," she cooed, her voice dripping with malice. "Do you really think you can escape me? I am in every shadow, every whisper. I am in you." The old woman gripped my shoulder tightly, snapping me out of my trance. "You have to act now," she hissed. "She's strongest when you hesitate." The dagger in my hand felt impossibly heavy. Its runes pulsed, responding to the evil presence in the room. Eleanor's shadow advanced, filling the cabin with a suffocating darkness. "What's your decision, James?" the old woman urged. "Your life or hers? There's no time to waste." My mind raced, every memory, every regret flashing before my eyes. I thought about the lives Eleanor would ruin if I didn't stop her. I thought about the man at the diner, now a hollow shell because of me. And then, I made my choice. I lunged forward, plunging the dagger into my chest. Pain exploded through my body, but as I fell to the floor, I saw Eleanor's form falter. She screamed, a sound so piercing it felt like it would tear the world apart. Her shadow writhed, growing smaller and smaller, until it was sucked into the dagger, now glowing brightly with the rune's light. The cabin shook violently, and the old woman stepped back, her expression grim. "You've done it," she whispered. "You've trapped her." As my vision blurred, I felt a strange sense of peace. The suffocating presence was gone, and for the first time in weeks, the air felt clear. "What happens now?" I asked weakly. The old woman knelt beside me, taking the dagger from my hand. "She's sealed in the blade, but only temporarily. Someone will have to guard it, to make sure she never escapes again." I nodded, my strength fading. "Make sure no one else suffers." And then everything went dark. Epilogue. Weeks later, the dagger was locked away in an unmarked vault deep beneath the earth. The old woman ensured its location was known only to her, a secret she would carry to her grave. But legends have a way of resurfacing. Years later, a group of explorers stumbled upon the vault, drawn by rumors of a cursed artifact. They pried it open, their curiosity outweighing their caution. Inside, they found the dagger, its runes still glowing faintly. One of them reached out, his fingers brushing the blade, and in the shadows, something stirred. Would you have made the same choice as James? Or would you have let someone else pay the price? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, some stories are better left untold. If this video gave you chills, left you on the edge of your seat, or sparked your curiosity, then you definitely need to hit that like button now. Don't forget to share it with your friends, because trust me, they'll be just as hooked as you are. And if you're not already subscribed, what are you waiting for? You don't want to miss out on the next mind-blowing episode. Hit the bell to stay updated and get ready for more spine-tingling stories that'll keep you coming back for more. Let's see if you can handle what's coming next.